Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to welcome you to today's webinar on Building for Everyone, an introduction to universal design. My name is Ginlon Wang, and I'm the Assistant Education Director for the RAI. And the RAI is very proud to collaborate with the Centre for Excellence in Universal Design. Promoting inclusivity in the built environment is at the heart of the RAI's mission. Our ongoing partnership, including the CPD series, plays an important role in advancing a more inclusive profession that ensures accessibility for all. Today marks the first in a series of 4 webinars focusing on different aspects of universal design in the built environment. So before we get started, I'd just like to highlight a few accessibility features available to you for today's session. The live captions are being provided by Judith Milady from PCR. Additionally, we are joined by Irish Sign Language interpreter, Catherine White. And to enable captions, simply click on the CC button at the bottom of your screen. And for the Irish Sign Language interpretation, click on the globe icon, and you might find this icon under the More button at the bottom of your screen again. So now I'm thrilled to introduce today's speaker. Ruth O'Reilly is a Senior Built Environment Design Advisor at the Centre for Excellence in Universal Design. Ruth's an architect with a master's in accessibility and inclusive design. And she's been working in the area of universal design and accessibility for more than 15 years and is passionate about her work to promote the impact that universal design can have on well-being and inclusion. Ruth's presentation will last approximately 45 minutes, followed by a 10 to 15-minute Q&A session. Please feel free to submit your questions throughout the presentation using the Q&A function, and we'll address as many as time allows. So on that note, I'm pleased to hand over to you, Ruth. Welcome.
Welcome, everybody. It's great to have so many of you here for this first in our series of webinars on universal design in the built environment. And thank you very much, Ginlong, for that introduction. So first of all, I'm going to share my presentation and we can get started. So we are absolutely delighted here at the Centre for Excellence in Universal Design to support this series of 4 webinars. And I hope that my talk today, which is an introduction to universal design, will set the scene for the remaining 3 CPD events. For anyone who can't see my slides today, I will describe any images that I'm talking about where they're important in the slides. And we will be putting a recording of all of the webinars on YouTube. So please sit back and relax. All of this will be available on a recording to you over the next few weeks. I also just want to say that anyone who requested a CPD certificate at registration will be sent one. And as Ginlong said, we'll have time for questions at the end. So I wanted to start by giving anyone who doesn't know about us some background on the Centre for Excellence in Universal Design. We are a part of the National Disability Authority and established under the Disability Act 2005. And with the remit to promote universal design, as you see from our title, and we work across 3 areas. We work in built environment, products and services, and in ICT. And one of our key messages is that for an environment to be truly inclusive, we need to see universal design being implemented across all of these 3 areas. The example shown on this slide is of the Luas Transport Service. So I think anyone would typically use, look for real-time information or an online timetable before they would use any public transport service like the Luas. So I suppose that's just one example of where that ICT, built environment and products and services would overlap. But today we are focusing on universal design in the built environment. So what am I going to talk about this afternoon? First of all, I'm going to explain the why, the what, and the benefits of universal design, so that you'll be taking away an understanding of what it's all about. Really designing in response to human needs, and particularly in the context of aging and disability. I should say that the language human needs for this learning outcome was very carefully chosen. It comes directly from the Qualifications Directive and from the RIAI standard of knowledge, skill and competence for practice as an architect. And they say that as architects, we need to have an understanding of the relationship between people and buildings and the need to relate buildings and the spaces between them to human needs and scale. Then I'm going to move on to explain the 7 principles of universal design, and I'm going to do that through built environment examples. And again, that's in response to feedback we have from people that they really need to see what this is all about. What does this look like in practice? I'm going to talk a little bit about universal design in relation to housing. This is an area that we're doing a lot of work on at the moment. And I'm also then going to point you to a range of further resources and information, which I hope that you'll take away and implement in your own work. Before I go on, I just wanted to note that we will be sending you a survey after the webinars asking for feedback and your preferences for further and for future CPD topics. So we'd really love to get your feedback on that so that we can plan further CPD for next year that will respond to your needs. The only important thing about design is how it relates to people. But this is a quote that we use to explain what universal design is all about. It's from a book called Design for the Real World from Victor Papanek. The focus of universal design is the experience of people using the environments we design. But importantly, we know that the people we're designing for are diverse. Everybody is different. People vary in a myriad of ways in their age, their size, functional capacities, gender. And critically, illness or disability, whether that's temporary or permanent, can affect our characteristics, a range of characteristics such as our mobility, our dexterity, reach, things like balance, strength and stamina, our senses, our sight, hearing, speech and touch, and cognitive abilities like knowledge, understanding, memory, or sense of direction. So a universal design approach comes from the point of view that good design works well for everyone. You may have heard Nicola Ryan in her CPD last year talk about the potential for design to bring moments of joy. And I absolutely loved that aspiration for good design. But unfortunately, we know that that is not always what people experience. So at the other end of the scale, poor design, it can cause stress and inconvenience. It can cause pain. It can bring about a lack of independence. And kind of, I suppose, at the lower end of the scale, the worst thing, it can cause outright exclusion and discrimination. And in the built environment, that can have a huge impact on a person's quality of life, including extremely important aspects like access to education, employment, and opportunities for social engagement. So implementing universal design in the built environment is really about aiming to build a more inclusive environment for us all. To emphasize the need for universal design, I have a small number of slides with data from our recent census in 2022. So first of all, to say that the questions that were asked in the census, they asked us about whether we had a long-lasting condition or a difficulty to some extent or to a great extent. And combining to some extent or a great extent, 21.5% of the population are classified as having a disability. But the graph on screen shows a slightly different statistic. It shows the number of households with at least one disabled person living in them. And I think that's a more useful way to look at the data because we know that disability is something that impacts on families as well as individuals. And the census found that 40% of households have at least one disabled person living in them. And I think that's quite a significant piece of statistic from our census. A very important thing to understand is the link between aging and disability. And on screen here is a graph I took from the Housing Commission report. And again, it has data based on Census 2022. It's looking at the prevalence of disability with increasing age. So on the x-axis is age. increasing from left to right, and on the y-axis is the prevalence of disability. And the graph shows that there is a significant link, a significant increase in disability as we age. So I think it's very clear that we can say that with aging comes disability. And one way I suppose I would urge you to think about universal design, is about designing for your future self. And then another, in relation to aging and disability, another thing to be aware of is our aging population. And again, we have very recent data in relation to that. So in July of 2024, the CSO issued a set of population projections for Ireland. They had 3 different scenarios based on different levels of migration. But in all of those 3 scenarios, they look at the period from 2023 to 2057. And under all of those, the percentage of the population aged over 65 is projected to increase very significantly. So in the 3 projections, that increase was going from 15%, which is what we have in Census 22, up to between 28 and 31% by 2057. So again, I think that really demonstrates future demand for universal design over the coming decades. I wanted to talk just a little bit about universal design and sustainability. And again, I think our aging population is a very important factor when we think about the 3 pillars of sustainability: society, environment, and economy. And for development to be truly sustainable, it needs to work under these 3 pillars. And I think most people will see that universal design sits very easily under the people pillar. But we would also argue that if we take a universal design approach as being integral to sustainable development, we'll reduce the need for wastely retrofit in the future, wastely and costly retrofit. So that's why in this slide, we've shown universal design at the center of that Venn diagram, showing the overlap between society, environment, and economy, overlapping between those 3 pillars. I suppose anyone who knows me will know that I sometimes get frustrated when I see sustainability being discussed only in the context of the environment and energy and ignoring the people, the society piece. And I think it's a very important thing for us to keep in mind when we're talking about sustainability. So that brings me to the definition of universal design: the design and composition of an environment so that it can be accessed, understood, and used to the greatest extent possible by all people, regardless of their age, size, ability, or disability. And I'd point you to the phrase there, to the greatest extent possible. It's really about extending the range of users of the buildings and the places that we're designing if we consider people's diverse needs and characteristics. And I think as architects, we need to be aware that every design decision we make has the potential to include people or exclude people. You may have heard it said, good design enables, bad design disables. And when we think about human rights, like the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities has a definition of universal design. The European Accessibility Act says it's the preferred way to reduce barriers to society for disabled people. So this, what I think is probably the most important assumption we can make as designers in relation to our mindset and how we think about universal design. So universal design assumes that every person at some time in their life will experience barriers, reduced functioning, maybe temporary or permanent. So on screen is the image of somebody using crutches with what looks like a temporary disability, a woman who's pregnant, somebody who is lost on holidays looking at a map, somebody carrying heavy shopping, and somebody holding hands walking along with a young child. So I think this assumption is really, really important. It's to do with, I suppose, our mindset as designers. We have to think we're not designing for people with disabilities or families with young children or older people separately or as an add-on. It's not special design. There's nothing special about aging. All of us are going to age. This is designing for ordinary people, for human need. And I would view this as a fundamental aspect of quality in architecture. So what about me? So I suppose you can see, I wear glasses. When I take off my glasses, I'm extremely short-sighted. Everything is turning into a blur, so I'll put them on quite quickly again. What you can't see about me is that about 10 years ago, I had terrible trouble with back pain. Luckily, I found out that if I started swimming, my back pain went away. So I've become an avid swimmer over the last 10 years. But why am I telling you about my experience? I suppose, first of all, to say short-sightedness and swimming doesn't go too well together. For me, the really important part of design in, for example, the swimming pool is the changing rooms, where I can't really see going between the changing room, the locker and the shower. I'd give a shout out to UCD Sports Centre, the way it's laid out. It's a really, really nice layout with the locker opposite the changing room and the shower is very closely adjacent with good visual contrast. But again, why am I talking about me? Two things. First of all, most people with a disability have more than one disability. So that would be one of the reasons we typically will give CPD based on parts of a building rather than cohorts of people. And the other thing I wanted to flag just from my own experience is everybody can see that I need to wear glasses, but most people don't know that I've had a history of having trouble with back pain. So just, two things to be aware of in relation to how we think about universal design and who we're designing for. And I think this mindset, it's something that's really, really critical when we think about the design perspective, universal design, because the aim for the design, it's the aim for universal design to become an integrated part of the design process. And when we see that happening is when we see really good design happening. There's two descriptions I like in relation to this. The first is that the best accessibility is the one that goes unnoticed. And the other is, at its best, universal design is invisible. So then to talk about one of the key benefits of universal design, and the images on screen is from a Microsoft design toolkit, and the title is Solve for One and Extend to Many. So from experience, we know that if we design for somebody with what might be considered extreme needs, the design will automatically include a wider range of people. And the example on this slide is a person with one arm. If we design for that person, we'll automatically make life easier for somebody with a broken arm in a sling, a temporary injury. And for a new parent, maybe somebody with a colicky baby who might have to carry the baby around for large parts of the day. I'm always tempted also to add in, my teenage children who are walking around with a mobile phone in their hand for long periods of the day to this slide. This benefit appears in all sorts of different ways. My most recent kind of example that I really liked was a local authority who were refurbishing a playground, and they put a new timber boardwalk across part of the sand pit with some seating to enable children using wheelchairs to be able to get close to the equipment, to the little mini diggers you see in sand pits and the raised sand tables. And what they found that the boardwalk was really, really popular with the parents because the parents were able to get closer to the children without getting sand in their shoes and on their feet. So when they measured, they found that the dwell time overall at the sand pit with this new timber boardwalk increased dramatically. So all of the children were getting more time to spend in the sand pit because their parents were so much happier and more comfortable. So to look at this, I suppose, slightly in reverse then, on this slide, I have an image in relation to housing. It's a duplex unit with stairs up to the front door. And on the left, I have the images of some people. They're just taken from Google Images, but they are based on people I know. And the title on this is Necessary for Some, Good for Everyone. So this benefit in Norway is explained by using this phrase, necessary for some, good for everyone. So we know that different people will be affected by design to different degrees. Some people will be ruled out together as a user. Others might have a temporary degree of difficulty. Maybe for others, it'll cause stress and convenience. So I think it's clear in relation to this example that the first three images, the person using a wheelchair, the person using crutches, and the person using a rollator, none of them would be able to access this apartment. They just would be ruled out. If they were in the private rental market, this would not be an option for them. The fourth person on the slide is quite a healthy looking older person. This, I suppose, is an example when I think of my own mother. About 10 years ago, she was very mobile, but she had osteoporosis and always had a fear of falling. So would always be the first one to use the handrail. If there wasn't a handrail and we were out and about, she would be gripping my elbow for support just because of fear of falling, even though she'd be a very, very independent woman. Now she has arthritis in her hip, so she just can't do stairs at all. But luckily, if she was living in this unit, she wouldn't be living at home anymore. But luckily, she's living in a bungalow in Galway, very happily, independently living at home with my father. The next image in this slide is of a young woman wheeling a buggy. And again, to think of this in relation to a temporary difficulty. So, for example, if a woman living in this unit ended up having a cesarean section, they would have been told no lifting for the next 6 weeks after you go home. Imagine the difficulty that would cause a mother at home with the baby and a buggy. Then the next two examples, I suppose, are examples of stress and inconvenience. Heavy shopping. Maybe if you lived here, you might use online shopping more. How happy would the delivery man be having to bring the groceries up and down the stairs? And the last one, again, it's an example, well, it's a man with a surfboard, but I was thinking of myself. I spent most of my 20s kayaking, and I suppose lots of kayaking gear. It would be quite unpleasant lugging it up and down those stairs as well. So really, I suppose it's just thinking again about the benefit of universal design, always thinking that if I design for somebody with that higher level of need, whole range of other people are going to benefit. And that brings me then, I suppose, to talking about universal design as a process. So a key part of a universal design approach is to identify what we would term lead users. Again, knowing that these people with a higher level of need, if we design to meet their needs and preferences, we'll automatically improve the experience of many other users. And we would promote user involvement in the design process as a key part of a universal design approach. And this slide is, I suppose, illustrating, how you go about that. It's on the left is kind of this bell curve of human ability. And if you choose people to be involved in the process that are kind of in the middle of that bell curve, you're not going to have a diverse range of uses and of characteristics within your user group. So really about, if you're consulting with people, make sure you try and get people or oversample people that are on the tails of that distribution curve, should I say. But that brings me then just to summarize the 3 key drivers for universal design. So the first is, social inclusion and human rights. People have a right to be involved and included in society. And, it's part of, equality legislation, etc., in Ireland. I'm not going to go into that in detail because in the next CPD, Tom Gray is going to be focusing on legislation. The second one is what I spoke about, good design that works well for everyone and necessary for some, good for everyone, and also the issue of sustainable development. And the last one then is around, thinking about extending the range of users. So if your client wants to have a wide range of customers in their business or service, then universal design makes good business sense. So I'm going to take a little pause there, and I have a little survey on screen for you to do. It'll be on Slido, and it says, which driver for universal design do you find most motivating? The business case, increasing the customer base. B is inspiring good design that works well for everyone. And C is enabling inclusion, social justice, and human rights. So I would ask you to, if you are on a computer or if you have your phone, to go on to slido.com and to enter that number 3202220. And I'm just going to pause for a minute to give people a chance to vote on that. And I'll just bring up that live poll on the screen. Now, researchers and my colleagues who are researchers say I shouldn't show the live results as people are voting because people can be influenced. So I'll just wait a minute. We have 70 votes. 70. I'll give another minute just to see. I'm not actually quite sure how many people. Oops, we have 232 participants. Look, I might wait until it goes to 100. Well, let's see. Okay, really interesting. We are close to half and half for inspiring good design that works well for everyone. and enabling inclusion, human rights, and social justice, and then a much smaller percentage in relation to the business case. So look, thank you very much. It's very interesting for us. We are trying to promote universal design, and it's always very interesting to hear, what inspires and motivates the people that we're talking to. Now you can keep on voting, but I'm going to move on in the slides. So the next part of my presentation is to talk about the 7 principles of universal design. And I suppose they set out in more detail what universal design is all about. All of the principles have a number of related guidelines. There's 29 guidelines in all. I won't be talking about them all today, but they're a really good guide, I suppose, to guide thinking and evaluation of designs. You'll find all of them on our website, but what I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk through each principle just with an example in the built environment. So the first principle is equitable use. It says the design is useful and marketable to people with diverse abilities, and it does not disadvantage or stigmatize users. And for me, this is probably the most important principle, kind of the foundational one that's related to all of the others. On screen, I have an example of Beyond the Trees in Avondale, which won the RAI Universal Design Award in 2023. I think it's a really good example of this principle. For anyone who isn't familiar with it, there is a treetop walk set in an absolutely beautiful historic forest in Avondale and Wicklow. There's an elevated path through the forest that leads to a tower with a viewing platform and a long, steep slide at the top. And what's really great about Beyond the Trees is that there's step-free access throughout. All of the pathways are either gently sloping or ramped. And it means that people with reduced mobility can experience the walk and get to the top of the tower with everyone else. And I picked this as the first example because sometimes universal design is really embedded in detail, but you can imagine that this design decision was absolutely critical and had a big impact on the overall approach to this project. And I know from talking to Van Dyke Architects that, there's some of the aspects were very challenging. There's really, really clever use of the site level. So at the start, you go up a relatively short ramp, and then the ground just, falls away from you very dramatically, and you get this experience of being so close to the tree canopy. And for me, it's really all about, being close to nature and that sensory experience of feeling the wind in your hair, the wind blowing through the trees, and the bird song. A story I had when we met the client down here was that he had a phone call from the parent of a child who went to Beyond the Trees on their 6th class school tour. And this parent's child was a wheelchair user, and she said it was the first time that he was able to go on a school tour and enjoy everything with his friends. If you can imagine, it's very rare to find a high, dramatic, exciting slide like this that you don't have to climb steps up to. So he was able to enjoy that with his friends. Again, the first time that he had that experience on a school tour. So for me, that's a really meaningful example of universal design bringing a moment of joy. These are the guidelines under that principle, equitable use. So it says provide the same means of users for all users, identical wherever possible and equivalent when not. And I think this is a clear example of identical whenever possible. Avoid segregating or stigmatizing any user. So again, in Avondale, everyone is using the same route and making the design appealing to all users. It's an absolutely, I'd urge anybody who hasn't been there to go down. It's an absolutely wonderful experience. I think their only problem is it's been so popular that you have to book a slot and go early if you want to get to the top of the slide without a big queue. I just wanted to highlight this issue in relation to a consultation that we had with children and young people. It's an excerpt from a report on that consultation in relation to the Code of Practice on Accessible Public Buildings, which we're drafting at the moment. So a few children said they wanted to use the same entrance as their family and friends if they're entering a building. Sometimes children with physical disabilities are asked to use a different door. This is upsetting and made them feel different to everyone else. So again, it's not about the building being accessible. It's about how does it make you feel I think that's a critical difference maybe between, basic accessibility and universal design. And the quotation was, revolving doors are not the worst thing to exist ever, even for me, not now in a wheelchair, they're so bad, from a young person with a physical disability. And I think if we're thinking about this principle and looking for a lead user, I think children and young people would be the extreme user. They don't want to be different. They don't want to be segregated or stigmatized. They want to be able to do things with their friends. Moving on to principle 2, it's flexibility in use. The design accommodates a wide range of individual preferences and abilities. So sometimes in Avondale, we can find one solution to meet everyone's needs, but sometimes we need to provide choice. So the example I have here is from an informal breakout area in the Central Bank of Ireland. I think most of the other examples I have are from the Central Bank because we developed an e-learning module on that as a case study, which I'll tell you a little bit more about later. So again, this informal breakout area, it's kind of part of the idea that the building would encourage collaboration in the workplace, less formal than a meeting room. But you'll see that there's different types of seating provided here. So people can pick the type of seating that they prefer at the time. There's the table and chairs, there's the more relaxed seating at the couch, and there's even a single chair where somebody, maybe if they want to take a phone call or a bit of quiet time to themselves, can sit down. One thing we'd always look for with seating is that you have some seating available that has arm and back rests, because it's really important, particularly for some older people who can find it difficult, to get out of a seat once they're sitting down. We'd also, look for visual contrast between furniture and the background to enable people to see it. Particularly people who are blind and partially sighted. So just to say, the vast majority of people who are blind and partially sighted have some vision, and visual contrast is very important in relation to enabling them to use the built environment independently. I'd also point out good use of visual contrast on this. So on the left of the screen, you can see the circulation route is defined using a white tile. So that white tile was used on all the circulation routes in the building, but then that the floor finish in this informal breakout area is a different material. It has both visual and tactile contrast. And in the e-learning module, a blind user is able to navigate using that difference in the tactile contrast to use the feedback from that white tile with his cane in using the circulation routes. Principle 3 is simple and intuitive use. Use of the design is easy to understand, regardless of the user's experience, knowledge, language skills, or current concentration levels. And I think a typical example of this in the built environment would be thinking about your experience, finding your way around a building, particularly if you're a first-time user. How easy is it to find your way around? So in the Central Bank, there's a central atrium, and it has stairs and bridges, walkways that link the different floors. So there's both horizontal and vertical connections, and that helps you to orientate yourself, and also great views out to the River Liffey. Again, very useful for orientation. Additionally, you can see in the photograph there is a sign at the top of the stairs with the number of the floor, again with good visual contrast to the background. And importantly, floor plates in the building, they all have a similar layout in relation where the toilets, the offices, and the meeting rooms are. And if you look at the e-learning module, there's Tony, a member of staff there who's blind. He notes that consistency in the floor plates really helps him navigating around the building. Principle 4 is perceptible information. The design communicates necessary information effectively to the user, regardless of ambient conditions or the user's sensory abilities. So in this image, we're showing a destination control lift, again at the Central Bank of Ireland, where you choose the floor that you want to go to before you enter the lift. And the position of the lift controls here are highlighted with a visually contrasting panel that's incorporating signage to tell you what floor you're on. So again, useful for everyone to identify the position of the controls, but very important for people who are blind or partially sighted. Just, I suppose, to give an example of the overlap between built environment and ICT, this lift control has audio output for somebody who can't see the screen. It'll tell you, lists the floors, and you can identify which floor you want to go to with the tactile button. So you can also see there that there's good visual contrast between the floor and the walls in this lobby space. And again, this is something that can have a big impact on choices of materials and finishes. So again, to be something important to be thinking about from the start of a project. Principle 5 is tolerance for error. The design minimizes hazards and the adverse consequences of accidental or unintended actions. So very close overlap here with the issues around health and safety. So again, in this image, I think you can see what I think is a really beautifully designed staircase. It's really, really comfortable to walk up and down. I know you can't tell that from the photographs. The handrail is highlighted with background lighting. There's contrasting nosing on both the riser and the tread, so you can see the edge of the tread both on the way up and the way down. But look, I know the Nicola Ryan is doing a full CPD on stairs, so again, I'm not going to dwell on that today. Principle 6 then is low physical effort. The design can be used efficiently and comfortably and with a minimum of fatigue. So this image is another view of the bank of lifts that I spoke about earlier. And obviously lifts are very important for anyone who isn't able to do stairs. But I also want to draw your attention to the doors at the end of the lobby. In the central bank, a lot of the doors are designed with hold open devices, so they're not closed in everyday use. And you can see here that the joinery is detailed nicely so that the doors are recessed. And again, we would often see fire doors with door closers that make them heavy and needing strength to get through. It can cause difficulty for anyone with reduced upper body strength, or somebody pushing a buggy, for example. It can be quite awkward to get through a fire door that's heavy. So again, thinking about how the doors are designed in your building is important. But again, because that's such a big issue, we have owner Hurley doing a separate webinar on doors. With regards to low physical effort, I just wanted to highlight the issue of distance because it's something I think it's very easy to forget about. This is an image from my local park early in the morning out for a walk. And during COVID, our local authority did fabulous work upgrading the paths. They doubled the width and they resurfaced them. So this path, it's a generous width, it's a smooth surface, it's relatively wide. And in the image here, there's a picture of a man using a walking stick. But it's really to highlight the issue that some people have reduced stamina. So it's important to provide resting points on access routes, no matter how accessible you consider them. In the distance in this picture, you can just see a seat that's recessed under the tree there. So again, just to highlight that, the need to provide resting spaces for people to think about distance when thinking about low physical effort. And the final principle then is size and space for approach and use. Appropriate size and space is provided for approach, reach, manipulation, and use, regardless of the user's body size, posture, or mobility. So, a very clear example of this is having, adequately wide, clear circulation routes. Very important for people using mobility devices, pushing buggies, people who are blind, have low vision. It's important that the circulation routes are without obstacles to allow people to move around easily. What you can't see in this photograph is that the fire extinguishers and the first aid kits in the Central Bank of Ireland, they're all in recessed cupboards, so they're not creating an obstacle on circulation routes. So just to think then, who benefits from Principle 7, size and space for approach and use? So when we are looking at size and space in relation to dimensions and measurements, we typically use a user of a large motorized wheelchair as our lead user. I know in work I've been doing now in relation to housing, I think size and space for approach and use is just, if not more important, for some people with autism. For example, thinking about an adult and a child with an assistance dog, they'd need a lot more of a wider footpath, for example, than a wheelchair user. But again, we don't really have measures in relation to that. But just then, this slide is really about thinking of all the different people who benefit when we provide that size and space. a parent with a buggy, somebody using mobility devices like crutches and a rollator, somebody who's blind using a long cane for navigation, people providing support to other people, be that linking an older person or holding hands with a child. And then, very typical example, somebody walking around with shopping, looking at their phone, somebody with wheeled luggage. So again, just I wanted to reinforce that even though you might be, focused on the dimensions for wheelchair users, always, think about the range of people that are going to benefit from providing that space. So that's the 7 principles. And I just want to talk a little bit now about the difference between compliance with Part M and universal design. And I suppose the key point I want to get across is that Part M of the building regulations sets out the minimum requirements for access and use. But in contrast, universal design aims for good practice, recognizing the minimum requirement, of course, but going beyond it. So a key part of universal design approach is not to treat Part M as a target. So again, this is about having, I suppose, a certain mindset. If you aim for the minimum as a target, you are very unlikely to achieve beyond the minimum. I have just a short video now from the launch of our Changing Places toilets guidelines recently, and it's a snippet from the Minister for Disability, Minister Anne Rabbitte, when she was talking. She starts by talking about what the TGD says about universal design, and then reminding us about Part M as a minimum requirement.
Indeed, I noted that while Part M requirements may be regarded as a statutory minimum level of provision, the accompanying technical guidance states that those involved in the design and the construction of buildings should also have regard to universal design philosophy and consider making additional provisions where practical and appropriate. In this sense, then, it is important that the regulation are treated as a minimum rather than a target. And I think we'll underscore that. Treat it as a minimum rather than a target.
So as you can imagine, I was happy when I heard the Minister repeating that message, treat Part M as a minimum, not as a target. Now, I'm conscious of the time. It is 1:15, so I'm going to keep to another maybe 5 to 7 minutes so that we have time for questions. But I do want to touch on universal design in housing. So I suppose important to say that when we look at Part M, the regulation M1, that main regulation, says adequate provision shall be made for people to access and use a building, its facilities and its environs. But importantly, TGDM clarifies what access provision is. For new buildings, it's that new buildings other than dwellings are accessible and usable, and new dwellings are visitable. So the work we're doing around universal design in housing is around designing housing so that it's livable for families with young children, disabled and older people, not just visitable. And I suppose very important in the relation to the importance of older people being able to age in place for as long as possible. So universal design in housing appears in a number of policies. On screen, I have Housing for All, I have Housing Options for Our Ageing Population Policy Statement, and the National Housing Strategy for Disabled People. But critically, I think in response to this policy, we're now seeing a number of county development plans that have specific targets for universal design in housing schemes, typically a percentage of dwellings in a housing scheme to be accessible or universally designed. Back in 2015, we published our Universal Design Guidelines for Homes in Ireland, again, which is available on our website, as well as what we called a child document, Universal Design Guidelines for Dementia-Friendly Dwellings for people with dementia, their families and carers. So at the moment, we're working on a new Irish standard on universal design dwelling because it's been, I think, recognised that we need to move from guidelines to a standard to clarify what's a requirement and what's a recommendation. We're hoping to go to public consultation in early 2025 on that standard. So in outline, what are universal design homes all about? I suppose, importantly, this is about mainstreaming, not considering them separate or distinct for special needs, integrated into the neighbourhood, easy to approach, enter and move about in, easy to understand, use and manage, and flexible, cost-effective and adaptable over time. So recognising that people's needs change over time, but if you build in features to make aspects of the dwelling adaptable, that can really help people in particular as they age. And importantly, our guidelines have what's described as a two-tiered system. They set out two different categories, Universal Design Home and Universal Design Home Plus. And for wheelchair livable homes, we recommend that Universal Design Home Plus guidelines should be applied. Typically, they have greater spatial requirements, and some features that might be provided for future adaptability at UD Home are required at the start in UD Home Plus. And we would advise that in residential developments, you should have some Universal Design Home and Universal Design Home Plus dwellings. This is just to say that there's also a universal design section in the Home Performance Index from the Irish Green Building Council. And I work closely with the LDA. They developed some UD apartment types, which you could look at in their apartment typology booklet that's available online. And again, because the LDA has adopted the Home Performance Index as part of their own quality assurance. So I'm going to leave it at that in relation to universal design homes. I think you could easily have another separate CPD on universal design homes. And this then just brings me to the end of the presentation. I just wanted to point you to some of the resources we have available on universaldesign.ie. All of these are freely available for you to download. Building for Everyone, a universal design approach. I hope most people on would be aware of this, a series of 10 booklets around universal design in the built environment. I've spoke about our universal design homes, guidelines for homes in Ireland and for dementia-friendly dwellings. We have universal design guidelines for early learning and care settings, I suppose for children, young people, staff and families. We have universal design guidelines for improving quality of life and enhancing COVID-19 infection control in existing residential care settings for older people. So anyone involved in nursing homes, I think, should be interested in looking at those. Our universal design guidelines for changing places toilets were launched recently, and they look at good practice guidance for provision, location, design, and importantly, management and maintenance of changing places toilets. We're aiming to complement implementation of Building Regulations Part M 2022 for those which, as you know now, have requirements for changing places toilets, having regard to the size and the use of the building. I wanted to draw your attention to an Irish and European standard. So ISEN 17210 sets out functional requirements for accessibility and usability of the built environment. And it has an associated technical report that sets out technical performance criteria linked to those functional requirements. They're available for purchase from the National Standards Authority of Ireland, but I do think they're useful standards to have in your office. I mentioned that we have an e-learning module, which is based on a case study of the Central Bank of Ireland, which I used a lot of examples from today. This has interactive videos with people using the building, interviews or short testimony from the architect, the client, and the access consultant. Again, that's free to access. It takes about an hour. There's a little assessment on it, so you can get 1 CPD point if you want to do that. Again, you'll find a link to it on our website. You just have to sign up to our Learning Hub with an email address. And finally, just to say to you that there's a new initiative at European level, the European Accessibility Resource Centre, which is, bringing together resources on accessibility, universal design, and also is providing training. So again, if this is something you're interested in, they have a newsletter that is highlighting events coming up. So, easy to sign up for that if you want to stay up to date on that. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. I'll stop sharing and get along. Hopefully you have some questions and we have some time to answer those.